Hello everyone, welcome to Career Talks channel. Those who do not know me, this is Priyanka and right now I am recording my fifth session on the series Scrum Master interview questions. Those who have not got the opportunity to go through the previous four series, you can see the links in the comment section. Also, with the help of this platform, I would like to thank Sunant, who has given me this opportunity to express or share my real-time experience of Scrum Master, with the help of which I am able to help multiple aspiring Scrum Masters who are regularly visiting Career Talks channel and are gaining a lot of valuable information. Thank you, Sunant, one more time. So without wasting much more time, I think let's jump into the questions that we are going to discuss into the series. I hope this is really going to help you. Thank you. The first question of the series is, what is the reason for sprint review? What happens in sprint review and the role of a Scrum Master during this meeting? Now, what is sprint review meeting? Sprint review meeting is one of the ceremonies in Scrum framework. It is an event or a meeting that happens on the last day of the sprint. It is last second event of the sprint, and during this meeting we inspect the outcome of the sprint and we also determine future adaptations, which means during this meeting the Scrum team along with the client representatives meet together and they talk about, especially the developers or the PO discusses about what has been developed during this meeting, during the sprint. What is it that we have been able to achieve as the increment for the sprint? So whatever functionality developers have been able to develop during the sprint, we showcase it to client stakeholders and get their feedback. The purpose of this meeting is to inspect it, to get their feedback, and if there are any changes that are needed, we can make those necessary changes and determine the future course of action for our sprints. So it's generally the product owner who is demonstrating the features or the functionality that we have developed during the sprint to the client stakeholders. Scrum Master needs to ensure that whatever has been demonstrated, everybody in the room has been able to understand it, and if he sees or observes that there is some confusion while reading the faces of people in the room, he can ask questions or clarify that is the representative able to understand it? Was he expecting the same thing, or are there any changes needed? And we can discuss those details then and there. We also talk about future adaptations. So whatever has been discussed during sprint review meeting decides what is the next priority for our future sprints. Basis that we decide the course of action for our next sprints. Also, like I said, it should be a working session. It should not be a presentation or a PPT that we are showcasing to the client. Rather, it should be a demo of the actual increment that developers have been able to develop, end-to-end functionality, so that client can see how an end user would be able to perceive the product and is it really gonna help to the end users, and that's how he will be able to give the feedback or suggestions to the team. So this meeting is basically inspect and adapt the product. There's nothing we talk about the processes or individuals during this meeting. That is done during retrospective, and that's the difference between a review and a retrospective meeting, which is in review we talk about only and only the product, the increment that we have been able to develop. Is it right? Is it what the client was expecting? Do we need any changes? And how, with the help of this increment, we can define that what is needed in the future. Let's talk about the time boxing for this event. So like every other ceremony in our sprint framework, sprint review is also time boxed. And this time boxing depends upon the cadence. So if it's a 4-week sprint, the sprint review would be 4 hours. Similarly, for a 2-week sprint, it would be a 2-hour review at max. At max, for a 1 week, it would be a 1 hour, and for a 3 week, similarly, it would be 3 hours. That's how we time box our sprint review meeting. Now the purpose of sprint review meeting, and I think I forgot one point, which is we not only inspect the product increment, rather we also talk about what has been changed in an environment. So is there any changes in the market, or maybe what is the potential use of the product? Are there any budget constraints now? Are there any new technologies that are there in the market and we should be changing our technology? So these are also some vital points, sometimes overlooked, but something should be discussed in sprint review meeting. I think now let's jump on to what is the role of a Scrum Master during this sprint review meeting. The role of a Scrum Master is majorly facilitation of the meeting, but it's not only that Scrum Master necessarily has to do the facilitation. There is anybody else also in the team who can do this facilitation. It could be the product owner or any of the developer. The role of a Scrum Master is to ensure that it's an effective event and is productive. He needs to ensure that the meeting is happening for sure and is happening at the same day and the same time in every sprint. He needs to ensure that everybody is respecting the time boxing. So the meeting needs to be finished on time. So for a 2-week sprint, it should be finished within 2 hours. And if we are not able to finish it in 2 hours, Scrum Master needs to ensure that we are on the right track, we are focusing on the agenda, and we are not deviating, so that we are able to wrap it up on time. He needs to ensure that the result of this meeting is positive and productive. There is no blame game happening during the meeting. And whatever feedback the client has given during the meeting, Scrum Master ensures that those are being taken care of and we are working towards the product goal. He needs to ensure that the outcome of this meeting is working as a input for our next sprint basically. Also, like I mentioned above, before we actually go into the meeting, Scrum Master needs to check how we are going to present, or he can check probably if it's a forming team or a very new team, that this is not a presentation and it's a working session that is going to happen during review. I think these are the main responsibilities of a Scrum Master during the Scrum review meeting, based on my experience or my learning of the framework. Okay, so this one is really interesting. It talks about what if a Scrum Master is not available during sprint planning and closure? What would you do as a Scrum Master? So I would like to break down this question into 3 sections. I would say that if a PO is not available for a short term, like maybe from a day to a week, or he is not available for a medium term, which we call as from a week to 2 weeks, and a long term, which is more than 2 weeks. So let's start with short term. Short-term absences are usually the easiest one to deal with. In this, the impact is limited because we generally rely on self-organization. Agile teams are considered to be self-organized. So in case of Scrum events or product backlog refinement meetings happens and the PO is not available, and the team is all we need to make sure that the team is already informed about it, and we let them self-organize with the help of probably Scrum Master and Agile Coach. If the absence gets closer to a week, there is a little more time that needs to be invested, ensuring that everybody is aligned. This means answering some extra questions and ensuring some stakeholders are available in case questions arise during his absence. Now, since we trust the team to self-organize during a sprint, the absence of a PO for a short term should not have a major impact. However, if there is less trust, there are impacts that can happen on the team, especially in the review meeting, for example. We will have to prepare this review meeting entirely with the help in the absence of PO. But if there is a lot of trust in the team with the PO, then I think these are easily to handle with the help of Scrum Master, and a little preparation is needed. I think the bottom line for a short-term absenteeism of a PO during a sprint is minimal. If there is a trust in the team, we rely on self-organization and prepare the team whenever necessary. I think short-term are easier ones. Now let's talk about if a PO goes on a leave for a medium term. So maybe he is absent for 1 week to 2 weeks. In this case, I think more preparation is needed, and I think we should have a representative or a backup present. During his absence, he might go on this leave. It could be a planned one or an unplanned one. In both the situations, he should be able to appoint a representative who should be, I think, very well prepared by the PO and should know which stakeholder to collaborate with, what would be the possible answers to the questions that developers are asking them. And he should have, I think, a dedicated time assigned to him, which he can dedicate to the team for that collaboration or for answering the questions that team is looking for. I think that representative is somebody outside the team or inside the team, but if he's somebody from inside the team, for example, a senior developer could be a representative for a PO during his absenteeism, it will be the most helpful because he knows a lot about the team. He knows about the product that they are developing, what are the business needs, what are the priorities. So I think representative, if he's a part of the team, is really a great idea, I would say, and would be able to support the team in a good way. Again, the representative should work closely with the Scrum Master or Agile Coach to ensure there is a smooth operation of the team. The Scrum Master or the Agile Coach who is working with the team knows pretty well what is going on in the team. He knows about the product backlog management and the stakeholder communication. Also, I think Scrum Masters and Agile Coaches have great facilitation skills. So the representative can leverage that in the absence of PO. Upon return, it's the responsibility of either the representative or the Scrum Master to think back on what happened during his absence. So I would say bottom line, for a medium-term absenteeism of a PO has a intermediate impact. We need to have a representative. We should also leverage Scrum Master or Agile Coach to support during that period. And the last point is whatever has been done during his absenteeism, that has to be synced between PO and the representative after he is back. Now let's talk about if he is gone for a longer time. So maybe a PO can go for a sabbatical leave, or he can go for a maternity leave. There can be a number of reasons a person is going on leaves for a longer duration of time. So these kind of absenteeisms could be, I would say, probably the easiest and the hardest at the same time. If the PO is going to be absent for a number of months, we should be able to find out a replacement PO, because longer periods of absence can bring more uncertainty. When will he come back? If he return, will he be able to pick up the role again? How will the business circumstances change? How will it affect the relationship between the team and stakeholders? All these questions. Also, longer absence requires business continuity plan. So as a business, nobody would like to take that risk of a PO going on a leave for such a longer period of time and simply return back and take over. So it would not be a good or a justice to the team, to the stakeholders, to the business, and to the PO itself. So I think there comes the hardest part, where finding a replacement PO is really a difficult job. Getting a good product owner to begin with is really hard, because he will have to take over. He'll have to run on jump on a running train, I would say, quickly, needing to bring themselves up to speed. I think I can share a real-time example with the team I am working upon. The PO is going out on a maternity leave for 6 months. So what we have done is we have find out a replacement a month back, and that new PO has shadowed the original PO for around 2 weeks, where he was actually trying to understand how the team is operating. So he is participating in daily Scrum meetings. He is participating in planning, backlog refinement, and he is also participating in review and retrospectives. Along with that, he is having some dedicated sessions with the original PO to understand what are the business priorities, what is it that we want to pick up for the next 6 months when the PO is absent. So high level idea about what is it that we are going to develop during the 6 months, and basis that he can prioritize himself. So he is getting himself familiarized with the product backlog, and he is trying to build relationship with the people during that shadow time, and so that once the PO is gone, he is in a good shape to take over the team and can be able to answer the real-time questions that the team is asking. In such type of situations, I think there is a good involvement from Scrum Master or Agile Coach that is needed, because he is working closely with the team and he can align the new PO with the team and can answer any questions that he may have during the absence of original PO. So I think going a Scrum Master on a going a PO on a long-term leave is never easy. But we have situations which we need to identify. So bottom line is finding a replacement PO and working with Scrum Master or Agile Coach to get this. Moving on to the next question, which is, what will happen if the user story is not estimated, or user story is not finished, or basically it's a spillover? Will you re-estimate the whole user story, or only the work which is not completed within that user story? So I would say, whenever a user story is not finished, there are reasons to that, why a user story is not finished. The typical reasons could be that team underestimated it, they did not understand the functionality or requirements of the user story well, and that's how they ended up spilling it over. It could be due to the absence of a developer, it could be unplanned one. So because a developer is on unplanned leave because of a certain reason, the team is not able to complete a story, and that's how the spillover happened. Other reason probably could be that there is a dependency on other team. The team thought that the dependency would be resolved, or sometimes what happens is there are technical stories wherein we have dependencies on other teams, and the dependencies could not be resolved in a previous sprint. So that's why we have to take that user story and the team thought that they will be able to finish this user story even if the collaboration is needed with other team, but somehow there were complications happened in the team, which is why the story is not able to complete. So these are typically some of the reasons which is why spillover happens, and this is not a very, I would say, uncommon thing. Spillovers happens, and when we are working in agile team, spillover is not a bad thing, because whatever we estimate, it's just a guess estimation. So spillovers can happen. Now, what happens if a story spills over? For example, there is a 8-pointer user story. The team started it at the beginning of a sprint, and now we are at the last day of the sprint, and there is a little work left. So maybe a review is left, or a part of testing is left, or testing is done, but the QA has identified a bug or defect without which the story cannot be marked as completed. So there are certain kind of things left because of which we cannot say the story is completed. In those cases, we can say the story needs to be spilled. So what we can do in this situation? I think there are two ways from my perspective. One is to split the story. Other is to carry forward it to the next sprint or maybe backlog. So what do you mean by split? Split means we or the team do not get the credit for story points, but they get the credit for hours. So we split the story, and in the backlog, what we are taking back is the entire story points that were estimated for that user story, but in the uh, comment section, we are documenting that only 2 SP of work is remaining. That is one way to split, which ideally is telling me that the team spent these many number of hours into this user story, but still they were not able to complete 2 SP of work. Next is carry forward. In this situation, the team neither gets the credit for the story points. So if it's 8 story point, they are getting 0 credit for that. So 0 story point would be included in the velocity for that story. Also, they do not get credit for hours. We are simply carry forwarding it to the next sprint. In both the situations, we are actually not estimating the user story again. We are still considering the original SPs, because I think from my perspective, a story point is like completed versus not completed is binary. So it's either completed or not completed. If it is half done, it's not meeting the definition of done. That means it's not completed and we cannot mark it as done. So that's how the entire story points need to be moved onto the next sprint or backlog. Now, whenever we spill a user story, we always take it back to the product backlog, and it's the PO who decides or reprioritize it. If he feels this needs to be completed, we take it to the next sprint. If he feels now the priority has been deprioritized, we could take it to the future sprint. I can give an example. So in one of my teams, the team was working on a onboarding of a service which takes which a developer was not able to complete because he had to take sick leave, and we moved it back to product backlog. In next sprint, the PO decided, since we have other high priority items in our product backlog already, we are keeping this onboarding to a lower priority now. So in this situation, we did not take up that story into the next sprint, and whatever the story points allocated to that user story, all of them were moved to the product backlog, because since it's not completed, we are not supposed to give that credit to the team. But whenever in whatever sprint the story is moved back to the sprint, since we are not re-estimating, the entire SPs would be credited in that sprint whenever it is completed. Now, there are a few steps that I have mentioned here which I typically use whenever a spillover happens. I would like to talk about them, which the first one is identify the stories you won't be able to finish. So whenever we are having our daily scrum, it's an idea to the team already that this is the particular user story we will not be able to finish into our sprint. So discussing that user story well in advance with the team, that this is something the team would not be able to complete within this sprint, so that we can communicate the risk well in advance to our product owner. So that's the first thing we do. We align with the team already that this is something we will not be able to complete within this sprint. Now, we also discuss with the product owner like what is the impact of not completing. Maybe there is somebody who can help with completing the user story. It raises basically awareness among all the participants that this is something at risk, and if this is really important, we should try to complete it to reach the sprint goal. It is currently in progress, so maybe if there is some other story, we can deprioritize and finish this one which is at risk. So we can make that prioritization if we are discussing it well in advance. So I think that's the first step that we do. Next thing, what we generally do is document and estimate the remaining portion. So like I discussed, that if it's an 8-story pointer and team is able to finish most of the work, maybe we are not able to do just the review. So we will document that detail into our description section. This can be done by any of the developers, with the help of a product owner if required. So we describe what is remaining to complete the task. Now, when we document it, then we estimate what is remaining. So we are not changing the original story points, but we are estimating like it's a 2-story pointer work that is left or a 3-story pointer, what is left. So that's how we do that. After that is done, we move the story back to the product backlog. So like I said, we never move the story to the next sprint, but we move it to the backlog when the sprints end, because during our planning, product owner will reprioritize it, that does this need to go back to the next sprint or to a future sprint, and that's why it always needs to be moved to product backlog. Last point, what we do is take the unfinished stories to the sprint retrospective. So in our retrospective, we talked about the unfinished story and the reason why we were not able to complete it. So this gives us an opportunity to reflect on what happened, what were the reasons we were not able to complete it, so that in future, if such kind of situations arises, we are able to work upon it. So every team member share their insights about the unfinished work. As sprint retrospective is a great learning opportunity that doesn't cost much, so discussing the unfinished work in retrospective really helps, and in future whenever similar situations happen, we have already a workaround about how we resolved it in the past, or what we decided we could do in future if such kind of situation arises. So I think that's about it. That's how we handle a unfinished story or a spillover whenever it happens. Okay, let's discuss about the next question of the series, which is about DOD and DOR. So how and when to create DOD and DOR. So before we talk about what, when and how to create a DOD or DOR, let's talk about what is a DOD and a DOR. So DOR and DOD are the acronyms for definition of ready and definition of done. These are basically the entry and exit criteria for a user story in a sprint. So whenever we pick up a whenever we pick up a user story within a sprint, that we want to take this user story for our sprint to be executed and deliver an increment at the end of a sprint, we look at our definition of ready, which is basically a checklist of items those needs to be checked to identify that story is ready to be moved into the sprint. So that's how it is called an entry criteria. So some of the examples of a DOR could be that the story is already estimated, the story is small enough to fit into a sprint, the story is meeting invest criteria. Invest, we all know, it's independent, negotiable, valuable, estimable, small and testable. So if a user story is fitting into this criteria, we call them as something ready to be taken for the sprint. Other items that could be included in the definition of ready are the dependencies have been removed, it has a clear acceptance criteria. So whenever all of these items are checked, then only we can say that yes, the story is ready to be picked up for the sprint. And if any of the items from this checklist is not checked yet, then we can say we need to resolve it first, we need to get it checked first, and then only we can take it for our sprint. That is called a definition of ready. Now on similar lines, we have definition of done, which is basically once the story is taken into a sprint and the team is working on it, then on what basis developers can say or the product owner can say that the story has been completed or marked as finished. Definition of ready, that's how it is called the exit criteria from the sprint. So if all of the items in the checklist are not checked, we cannot say the story is finished and we cannot mark it as completed. Again, some of the examples that we can have in a definition of done is that the development has been completed, the code has been moved to develop branch, it has been moved to staging, the unit tests have been written, they have been tested in development and staging, code has been reviewed, acceptance criteria is meeting. So these are some of the examples that could be in our definition of done. And these two definitions, definition of ready and definition of done, are these checklists are basically dynamic, which means that these are defined at the beginning of a project or maybe after a few sprints, basis how we are performing in our stories and what is it that needs to be changed, basis that these are defined in agreement with the team and product owner. And then whenever in future we see that there is a need to change any of the items in the checklist for these two definitions, those can be done. Also to point out that these definitions could be different for different issue types. So in Jira, we know we have different issue types, like we have user stories, we have tasks, we have defects, we have technical debts. So these user stories could be different. These definitions could be different for different types. It could be different for a user story. It could be different for a defect. It could be different for a technical debt. So for example, one of the item in our definition of ready is that story should be estimated. However, this is not applicable in case of a technical debt, because the purpose of technical debt is only to estimate how much story points will it take to complete that work or feature. So that's how these definitions could be different for different issue types. Now let's talk about how and when to create these DOR and DOD. So I have talked a little bit about it already, that these are developed from our real and practical needs. So for example, we defined 3 or 4 items that should be in our DOR, but over the time as we were working, we realized that there is something that needs to be added or removed from our definition of ready or definition of done. Then that can be done. So these are developed from real and practical needs, and like I said, these are dynamic, so they can change anytime. At the beginning of a project we defined certain definitions, but at a later stage, with the help of agreement and during our retrospective, we can edit and extend our definitions. We can add more items, we can remove certain which are not applicable now. Now let me give an example to explain how we can edit or extend them. I will be talking about an example of some of the revision we made in definition of done. So while we were working on a product, at the beginning of the product, our development environment was ready, and the team, whatever was developing only into the dev environment. The staging environment was not yet ready. So whatever development was happening was only in development environment. There was nothing done in the staging environment. Now at this point in time, our definition of done included that stories are tested in dev environment. So the code is in dev environment and the stories are tested in dev environment. There was no information about moving them to stage environment or testing them into stage environment because the environment was not ready. Now after a certain number of sprints, when we took the story of developing that staging environment, and when our staging environment was ready, then in those situations during our retrospective, we discussed about, now that our staging environment is ready, we are in a state to refine our definition of done, and we added a few more checkpoints in there, which is that once the stories move to dev environment and it is tested in dev environment, it needs to be moved to stage environment. So one of the items that was added in our DOD was move the code to staging branch and then test the code to staging branch. So this is how we refined our definition of done later into our product, as and when the product was building the increments for generating. So I think there is no much or so many details around how and when. Just to the bottom line, I would say is that these are not static, these are dynamic. They can be edited or extended anytime, and we discuss and refine them during our retrospectives depending upon our real and practical needs of the product. That's about it. Thank you.